Welcome to Fave Podcast, episode 24, a series where I interview friends and family and talk about their background, talk about their interests, and we share some stories. Today, I'm joined by my sister Joan Garfield. Joan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Stan. Thanks for the invitation, and it's always fun to talk with you.
I think I know some of the answers to these questions, but I'm going to ask them anyway. When and where were you born?
I was born in May of 1950 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And what is your ancestry?
Well, my ancestry is German Jewish on my mother's side and Polish, Russian Jewish on my father's side.
And where have you lived?
Well, I've lived in quite a few places, as you know, starting with Milwaukee and then two different suburbs of Chicago, Oak Park and Evanston, and then a 6-year stint in Omaha, Nebraska, a year in the St. Louis area, 6 years in New Jersey. One of those years I was in college in Chicago. Then our family moved back to St. Louis, and I moved to Madison, Wisconsin to go to school. Lived in a suburb of Chicago after that for 2 years, back to St. Louis for 9 months, and then 1975 Labor Day, moved to Minneapolis with you and Barb in a caravan, and I've been living here ever since. So 50 years in Minneapolis.
So you've had two chapters, one moving around all the time and then living in Minnesota for a long time. How do you compare those two parts of your life?
Well, that's interesting. I think that growing up and having to move and make new friends um, helped me be resilient in many ways. And I became not only good at making new friends, but I developed a lifelong passion for staying in touch with people. So I now am in contact with a friend from kindergarten, elementary friends from elementary school, junior high, high school, college. And I think that developed a passion for keeping in touch with friends and really valuing friendships. And then here in Minneapolis, I've been able to put down roots. I've lived in the same house for 38 years. Um, and that has a comfort to it of really knowing my neighborhood, my neighbors, um, knowing people for the length of time that I've lived here. And that has a great comfort and satisfaction with it.
When you were growing up and moving so frequently, do you remember how you felt about all that? How did it affect you?
Well, I think I don't really remember how I felt when we moved to Omaha when I was in second grade. I think I did okay with that. When we moved to St. Louis, I was entering eighth grade and I was going through quite an awkward period. And I actually welcomed that move as a chance to start fresh where nobody knew me and I could kind of reinvent myself. And that felt good. And I had a wonderful year in St. Louis. I had so many friends, so many activities. And then all of a sudden, we were uprooted and moved to New Jersey. And that was a very difficult one for me because I felt a little bullied in some ways. People made fun of me because they didn't know St. Louis. They thought I lived on a farm. And it took me a while to make friends. And that one, I dreaded the move to New York. In fact, my sister Ann and I threatened to have a hunger strike, which didn't do anything. So that was a hard one. That was probably the hardest one of all. But I don't remember the earlier ones that well.
Did that have any influence on you wanting to stay put in one place, having gone through that?
I don't think it was an intention to stay put. I think
Hmm.
it just happened.
Hmm.
But I have to say, I get great enjoyment out of seeing my children who moved away and moved back, who are still connected with their childhood friends. And at each of their weddings, their childhood friends have been there. And it just makes me happy that they've been able to maintain those in a much more consistent way. And for a while, my grandsons went to the same elementary school that my son went to. So there's some, continuity
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
So yeah, I think it gives me a lot of enjoyment.
So who was in our family when you were growing up?
Well, there's our parents. Saul and Amy Garfield, and my sister Anne, who was born 2 years ahead of me, who, according to my mom, was the center of my universe. And when we were young, I think we looked somewhat alike. We both had short, dark, curly hair and dark brown eyes. So she was my greatest playmate early on. And then you came along when I was 3. And then David came along when I was 6. And we were, except for the 6 years we lived in the Chicago area, it was just us because our relatives were mostly in Chicago and we saw them maybe once a year. So it's just the 6 of us.
Now, you had a pretty good relationship with part of our family, the cousins. How did that come about, and what was that like?
Um, well, I think when I was around 10, I was really interested in writing letters and having pen pals, but somebody sent me a chain letter and I had to find people to send it to. And one of the people I sent it to was my cousin Beth, who I didn't really know. I may have never even met her, maybe met her once when she was, very young. And she sent it back to me and said, my mother won't let, our Aunt Carla won't let me write a chain letter, but we could be pen pals, something like that. So we started writing to each other. And I'm not sure when I started going to visit, but I think because of our pen pal connection, I wanted to visit. And I think I was about 11 when I took my first solo bus ride to Indianapolis to spend a week with the Harrises, my Aunt Carla, Uncle Earl, and their 7 kids. And then every summer after that, I always took a bus from wherever we were living at the time to Indianapolis. And I felt that they were my sisters. Jack, the oldest, was like a big brother, although I didn't interact with him much. And I felt very connected to my Aunt Carla. She seemed much more like me than my mom. She was more creative, artistic, rebellious. So I always felt very comfortable, very recognized and valued there. And even in high school, even in college, I would go visit. I spent many Thanksgivings. I went during Christmas vacation. I always felt welcome there.
So the next question is about what our parents did. So what are your memories of what our parents did when we were younger?
Well, I think I was in about second grade, maybe third, when people kept asking what my dad did. And he taught me how to say chief psychologist, whatever that meant. That was his job. And I knew that he worked with people who had mental illness because he would tell me stories sometimes of patients that he had, and he would turn them into funny stories. But I knew that he worked with people who had a lot of problems, both children and adults, and that he worked very hard, and that every night he went up to his office and worked on writing a book. And my mom did not work when we were growing up, but I think once we got to Omaha, she became an active volunteer teaching Sunday school at our synagogue, being a Girl Scout leader, assisting on overnights. Um, and I don't know if she was in the League of Women Voters there or not, but I think she always tried to keep herself busy, both as a volunteer and both for intellectual stimulation. And that obviously increased when they were in St. Louis and she was part of the Washington U Women's Club. But she did go back to graduate school when I was in high school, got her master's in remedial reading, and then had a short but dedicated career as a reading teacher, both in New Jersey and in St. Louis.
So when you were young and you were in elementary school and junior high and high school, what were the activities that you liked to do?
I feel like asking you, what do you remember? I'll tell you what I think, and you see if
Okay.
you remember. I always had my nose in a book. I read all the time, and I remember taking the maximum number of books out of the library every week and sitting on a radiator. I guess we had like window seats over a radiator, and I would just read all the time. And then my second favorite thing was writing. I loved books about writers, young girls who would write. And so I enjoyed writing. I wrote my first poem in second grade. I wrote my first novel in sixth grade. And then I loved my friends. We had neighbors on the street There was a neighbor on the Rylanders who had a girl, Marilyn, who was 2 years younger than me. And then two houses down on the left, the Doozers had a daughter, Denny, who was a year younger than me. And I loved spending time with them. And then later, I had a very close friend, Francie Brody, who lived around the block. So reading, writing, and being with my friends.
When you think back, you think that Omaha period was like the best of our youth?
Um, Probably in many ways it was because I think our parents were happy. Our dad had many friends at work. We used to go to these picnics in the summer where we'd play baseball, or I remember doing the three-legged race with Craig Affleck, one of his colleagues. And we had very close friends from our synagogue, the Garrettses and the Combs. And so I felt like we had quite a rich community of friends, both professionally through dad and through our synagogue. And also, mom was very connected to women through our neighborhood and the Girl Scouts. So, and we all played music together. We used to have a little family orchestra. And I think even though our dad was restless and wanted to move up to something else, I think that he was probably in his happiest period there.
Yeah, I think so too. What did you want to be when you grew up?
A writer. I thought that was the only choice. I remember in sixth grade, we had to write about what you wanted to be when you grew up. And with full conviction, it was going to be a poet and a novelist. And then later in my life, I would write my autobiography. Much later, when I was in high school, I became interested in anthropology. And when I went off to college, that's what I thought my career would be. But that ended abruptly with my first anthropology course.
So where did you go off to college, and then tell us where you went after that?
Well, I started at University of Chicago, which was my second choice. I had my heart set on Oberlin, but they wouldn't take me. But U of Chicago took me and my sister. Our sister Anne was there, and our grandmothers were both in Chicago, and two sets of aunts and uncles. So it felt like a very familiar and safe place to be. So I went there my first year, and it was 1968, right after the big Chicago convention, and I was very involved in anti-war protests. And it was a very difficult time for me in terms of my feelings about the country and the politics and the Vietnam War. Plus, people were just starting to smoke marijuana. There was a whole new line of rock music. It was a real kind of the start of the counterculture. And so I was dealing with a lot of those phenomena, and also just my first time away from home on my own, trying to figure out who I was and who I wanted to be. And so it wasn't a very easy or comforting time. And as I took my first anthropology course and did not feel like I liked it or understood it at all, I felt like I lost my footing and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And given that our father had offered me, I think, a total of $3,000 towards my college education, I didn't know how I was going to pay for college or what I would do afterwards. So I took a year off to work in New York and try some different experiences. Like I took art classes, I babysat for some young girls down the street, and tried to figure out what I really wanted to do with my life. And two major things happened. Our family moved back to St. Louis, and our father's new job at Washington U offered to pay up to half of Washington U's tuition for wherever I wanted to go to college, or all of it if I went to Washington U. And I decided that I really wanted to be an elementary school teacher, but to be a very unique one who would really touch the lives of children. I envisioned working in inner city schools, helping kids who had difficulties succeed. And the University of Wisconsin had a program that seemed to address all of those goals. And it cost less than half the tuition at Washington U. So it was a win-win. And I transferred to Wisconsin. I had a fabulous education there in my education and non-education courses. Really loved every minute there, made wonderful, dear friends who I'm still close to, and became a teacher, which even though I didn't stay in elementary ed, which was my major, I've been a teacher my whole career. So it really set the foundations for my life path.
Had you given any serious consideration to going to Barnard?
No, because even though dad's job at teachers college would pay for it, they had a rule that your freshman year, if you were if you were getting the free tuition, you lived within a 30 or 60-mile radius, you had to live at home and commute. And I did not want to live at home and commute my first year of college.
So if they had let you live on campus, would you have done so?
I don't know because I think a part of me was really drawn to the Midwest. I
Hmm.
never felt like I was a New Yorker. And all my friends were applying to schools in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. And I just felt this longing to go back to the Midwest. I just felt like that's where my roots were. So I had applied to Oberlin, Wisconsin, Washington U, and Chicago. And I got into all of them except Oberlin, which I'm very glad I never went to. So it's interesting how the things you wish for that don't happen, often you look back and you think, thank goodness that didn't
Yeah,
happen.
that's right. Um, so what did you end up? You switched your major, or you were thinking of majoring in anthropology, but then you switched to elementary ed, and that was it the rest of college?
Yes, so I was an elementary ed
Yeah.
major in college, but it just so happened that I took a lot of math courses. I came in with credit from math that I took in Chicago, and then I had to take some math courses for being an elementary teacher. And then somehow I ended up taking another math course or two, and that enabled me to be certified to be a math teacher in Chicago. So I actually, my first real full-time job was teaching math rather than elementary ed.
Okay. And where was that first job?
That was in Downers Grove, Chicago. I had one of the reasons I applied to Wisconsin is because they had a very unique internship program where your last semester they would place you in a school and they would give you full responsibility to teach and pay you rather than have you be a student teacher in someone else's classroom. And the way they described it, they would send you to a small rural school in northern Wisconsin. And that really appealed to me. So my dear friend Linda, Linda Tucson, she and I applied to go together into an internship program in northern Wisconsin. And lo and behold, they said, we're sending you to Chicago. But again, that was perfect because they sent us to a very innovative new school that was built without walls. So they were trying to embrace all the latest reforms in education. And I was paired up with a sixth grade teacher who became a lifelong friend and mentor. And I had such a great time teaching there that I was actually recruited to teach junior high as soon as I graduated. So I didn't even have to apply. I just,
Uh-huh.
took the job, taught for 2 years. But then I realized that there was a lot more to teaching junior high math than I knew, and I had no training in teaching junior high math. So that propelled me to go back to go to graduate school, and that led to the next phase.
But you came home from Downers Grove, I think
Yeah,
mid-year, is that right?
yeah. I had finished 2 full years because I started in January,
Hmm.
because I graduated in December,
Yeah.
in January. And I knew that I felt like I'd mastered it and it wasn't challenging. And I also wanted to do more. And I knew that I didn't really understand the learning process in math. I knew how to make it fun. I knew how to be kind, but I felt like I need to learn more about how people actually function in their, how their cognitive reasoning is and so on. So I had applied to University of Minnesota thinking I will go there if they offer me a fellowship or a scholarship. And I can't remember if I think that I was accepted, but they didn't offer me money.
Hmm.
I had still kind of shut the door on teaching and thought I need to, do something else. So I moved back to St. Louis and got a job working at the Library Limited bookstore, thinking, well, maybe this is what I'll do with my life.
Hmm.
That didn't last more than 9 months. And during that time, I got a call from University of Minnesota saying, "We have an assistantship for you. Are you still coming?" So,
So tell us about that call. As I recall, it was somewhat serendipitous.
yes, in fact, that could have been my story for today. Um, so I was living in an apartment with one of my closest friends from eighth grade, Susan, and she had started having a relationship with your roommate, Jerry. And I was feeling a lot like a third wheel, and I didn't really know what I was going to do next. And our parents were in Europe, and they had asked me to water the indoor house plants while they were gone. And so I had gone over to water the plants, and the phone rang in the house. And in those days, we had no answering machines. And I heard a voice say, "This is Dr. Robert Jackson at the University of Minnesota. May I speak to Joan Garfield?" And I didn't know who he was. And I said, this is Joan. And he said, "Well, I just wanted to say that we hope you're still coming in the fall. And I'd like to offer you an assistantship. We can give you 50% support, and that will help pay for your tuition and so on." And I had totally written off going to grad school because they hadn't offered me money. And it's now July and school starts in September. And I thought, well, I guess I better come up and visit and meet this guy and see if this is what I want to do, because he was offering me an assistantship to work with him. So I must have gotten a ticket for that weekend. And I had been in Minnesota for my college roommate Linda's wedding and had met some of her friends who were actually the ones who convinced me to apply to graduate school there. So I called them up and said, "I think I may be coming. Can I stay with you? Can you help me find a place to live?" And so Lynn and Mark Schwartz picked me up at the airport, took me around. I met Dr. Jackson. I learned about the program and found an apartment all in 2 days.
Wow.
Went home, packed my things, and you and Barb loaded up your car and off we came.
So then you originally got a master's degree, right? And
Yeah.
then did you know you were going to go on and get a doctorate or not?
No, in fact, I had never, ever even wanted to go to grad school. I had no aspirations, but I did want to study more about math education. And so I entered the math education program, and it was fabulous. I loved it. I loved my classes. I had never been such a good student in my life. When I was in Wisconsin, my classes were pretty easy for me, and I would take 6 classes and study very little. And my roommates would be so annoyed with me because one was in nursing and she had to study all the time. And she'd say, "Boy, how do you do it?" But they just weren't that challenging, although I enjoyed them. But I got to grad school and I just ate everything up. I read books before the semester started. And it was so relevant because I had just been a math teacher for 2 years and I could relate to everything I was reading. And again, it was all about reforming the way math was taught and really zeroing in on how people learn math and what mathematical reasoning is. So I ate it up. But then I started to be a little nervous about what I was going to do next because I had this lofty idea that I would be a curriculum consultant, and but there weren't that many jobs out there. And so then I took my first statistics course in order to do my master's research, and I really liked it. And I decided to take the doctoral sequence just because I found it interesting. So I was still in my master's, but I took the doctoral sequence from a man named Ray Collier, and I just loved the material. He was very much a mathematical statistician who taught to students in education and psychology, but his background was more pure and applied statistics. And I always had questions. And one day he said, "I think you should come over and be my doctoral student." And I was kind of surprised. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I never thought about a career in statistics, but I applied and got into the program. And I thought that my career would have led me to being a statistician, but in order to help put myself through graduate school, I got a job teaching statistics at the University of Minnesota, and I found that I was once again most interested in the teaching and helping people who struggled and had difficulties. And so I ended up doing my research on teaching statistics, and then that became my career path. So it was never what I intended to do,
Mhm.
but it's where I ended up, and it was a great career. I went to two different I taught in two different colleges at the university and really enjoyed my time there.
Now, how long did it take to get the master's and how long for the PhD?
It was 2 years for the master's and
Mm,
4 years for the PhD.
okay.
So 6 years, I think, is often standard, although my husband, Michael, took 10, and that's not including his 2 years in a master's program at
So it's a
Indiana.
good thing he wasn't a student under our dad because he would have kicked him out of the program.
That's right. Yeah.
So then what did you think you were going to do after you finished up your doctorate?
Well, I think as I said, when I started, I thought I
Yeah.
would be a
Yeah.
statistician. When I was in my last year of the doctoral program, Michael and I were getting married, and I still had not taken any of my written or oral exams, and but I was offered a job teaching in the general college, and it was a tenure track job, which I had never aspired to. But I had been teaching there as a graduate student, so I knew the faculty, I knew the courses. It was very easy for me to do. Plus, it would be more money and have benefits. So I applied for the job thinking I'll just do this till Michael finishes, and then we'll decide what we do and where we go. So I got the job, but with it came, I didn't have my PhD yet. They said, you have 1 year to finish your PhD. So in that year, I took my 3 written exams, my oral exams, gathered my data, wrote my dissertation, and defended my dissertation, and was made an assistant professor. So, and then once I started, I pretty soon after that, I got pregnant, had my twins, took a maternity leave for a year. Michael still hadn't finished his dissertation. So I went back to teaching. And when I went back that fall after my twins were born, they were 9 months old. All of a sudden, I had this desire to just be the best assistant professor and to really immerse myself in my job. And that's when I decided I really loved being an academic and I wanted to stay at the university. I ended up changing colleges because the college I taught in was changed dramatically while I was there. Their 4 year degrees were eliminated, their upper division curriculum was eliminated, and it looked like my future was going to be teaching freshman math and stat for the rest of my life. So luckily, I was encouraged by a former colleague and mentor who had moved to the ed psych department. He said, I think you should move over to ed psych as well. And so I did. And then I had the great joy of starting my own graduate program there, recruiting my own graduate students, bringing in grants to fund my research. And I had tremendous support from my colleagues and my department. So it all worked out very well, although it was never what I intended or planned.
So then you had a pretty distinguished career in that field and you did some writing and speaking and nurtured a lot of students. What were some of the highlights?
I think one of the highlights was starting a small research forum in 1999 with my colleague Dan Zavi, who lives in Israel. And we both just had this dream. We were at a conference in Singapore, had this dream of starting a small research gathering that would be unlike the big conferences where people just present and sit down and maybe there's a couple questions. We wanted a small group of people who would really engage in conversation and really analyze each other's research. So we designed a first offering that was going to be held in 1999 at his kibbutz, which was one of the kibbutzes that was decimated in October 7th. But we had our first forum there, and we didn't know if anyone would come, but we got enough people to come. And all these years later, that forum is going strong. I stepped down in 2013. Danny stepped down 2 years ago. And one of my former graduate students hosted it at Penn State over the summer. And they've that group of people, I mean, there's people that come and go, but the core researchers from that group have produced at least 3 books, one of them an international handbook, many special issues of our top professional journals, and they're represented in conferences around the world. So I feel really proud of starting that group and that it's kept going and is going strong. So I guess that's my most, and I guess the other thing I'm very proud of is that I was encouraged by one of my senior colleagues to start my own graduate program in 2002, which was right at the time I lost my central vision and couldn't see, read. I could see, but I couldn't read. I couldn't drive. And I wasn't sure what my career was going to be. And at that time, I was going up for full professor. And I thought, why am I even going up for full professor when I'm disabled? But my department chair encouraged me to go up. And I started this grad program, and one student applied and came, Andy Ziffler. If he hadn't come, I don't know what would have happened. And then each year, more people came. And then when I got grants, I was able to fund up to 6 students. And they all thought of me as their professional mother, and they all thought of themselves as my children. And we called ourselves the Statistic Education Family. I had them over for dinners, we traveled, we wrote together, and they have all gone on to have wonderful careers. And Andy, my first student, took my office when I left and is still in the department that I retired from. But Matt is at Penn State, and Nicola is at a university in Seattle. Annalise is in Cal Poly. I had students come from Brazil, like Annalise, or Mexico, Iceland. And so I just feel so proud of those students. I'm so happy I had the privilege of working with them and helping them launch their careers. And I don't stay in touch with them that much, but they're very near and dear to my heart.
And when did you retire?
I retired in June of 2016, so almost 10 years ago.
When you think about the parallels between your career and our dad's, what do you think about that?
Well, it's kind of funny because, he was a psychologist, and I went through undergrad never taking a psychology course. In fact, I bet you didn't either, right?
No, I
Nor
didn't.
did Anne, and nor did David. So we did not study psychology. And I purposely did not want to go to graduate school because I didn't want to ever think about a career like our father's. So it's quite amusing that I ended up as a professor like our father, starting a small research group as our father did with SPR, writing an international handbook. I never was a journal editor. I was associate editor of several journals, but he was much more prolific and more involved in the journal aspects, or at least editing journals. So there certainly are parallels to our careers. I think I was a much more devoted and popular teacher. I got every teaching award that was available to me at the university and the college internationally. And Dad was not known for being a very compassionate teacher. He had very high standards. And sometimes when I was critical of my students' work, I would think of him and think, uh-oh, I don't want to be like him.
Did you and he ever talk about the fact that you had sort of followed in his footsteps?
Well, at one point when I was working on my dissertation, and or maybe it was before, I was in graduate school, and I reached a point, I guess maybe 2 years into grad school, before I met Michael and before I kind of got on that path of getting that assistant professor job. I wasn't sure if I was in the right position. I was feeling a little discouraged about graduate school. I'm not quite sure what led to that. And I remember asking Dad if he was proud of me for being in graduate school, and thinking that he would be proud of me for carrying on, working for a doctorate as he did. And he said, "Oh, there's lots of idiots out there who have PhDs." So he was never one to ever say, "I'm proud of you." Or, I think later in life, if I told him a book came out, he would say, "Oh, that's great." But I think he was more proud of Michael for finishing his degree. But I think that he never really wanted to, he didn't want to give praise, but I think he also liked, maybe he liked feeling that his career was much more important than mine. I think that, mine, I didn't have the illustrious achievements he did, like, being, well, I was chair of my division of the American Statistical Association, but I was never nominated for president, nor would I have wanted to be. So, yeah, there certainly were some commonalities, but I don't think he ever talked about it or seemed happy about it.
Hmm. All right. What is a hobby or interest that you enjoy?
Hmm. Well, I I like to do a lot of things. I do a lot of yoga. I do yoga almost every day. I love to swim. So I do a lot of physical things, strength training, walking, running, hiking. And part of that is because I enjoy it and it's a luxury to have time, but part of it's also for my health and well-being. And I do a lot of cooking. I think that's probably the thing I spend the most time is thinking about food and cooking and
Hmm.
feeding people and entertaining. And then I guess those would be the things I would call my hobbies.
Okay. Well, now it's time to talk about the five topics, starting with books. What do you like to read?
Well, I mostly read fiction, but I do like memoirs and I read nonfiction from time to time. And I still read as much as I can, although now I only listen since I can't read. I listen to audiobooks. And I I like a lot of modern authors like Ann Patchett, and I like classic authors like Virginia Woolf. Um, Lily King is a new favorite author of mine.
Is there a favorite book that you have or one that you like to recommend?
Well, I thought about that because I don't often reread books, but one book that I have reread 3 times, which is unusual in this stage of my life, is a book called Nothing to Declare by Mary Morris. And I'm just reading a new book that she has out now called The Red House. But she wrote a memoir about traveling in Mexico and living in San Miguel. And I've been to San Miguel twice. I'm going back there in January. And in fact, the reason I went there the first time was because I'd read her book and wanted to go. And each time I've reread it, I've loved it just as much. And so I think reading a book 3 times and loving it is a sign that it's
Yeah.
a
Yeah. What do you like to eat?
well, mostly vegetables. I love plant food and I love Mexican food and Middle Eastern food. Those I think are my favorites.
So we've been to a fair number of restaurants together. If I were to come visit you now, where would you want to take me?
Well, if I guess the restaurant that we've been the most excited about recently is a newer one called Boucheron, which is French, and it won a James Beard Award for the best new chef, maybe in the Midwest last year. And it's just a tiny little place, but really innovative food. So I think you would enjoy Boucheron. Now that it's won the James Beard Award, we can hardly get in there.
Uh,
You have to, go on at midnight,
yeah.
but I think I would take you to Boucheron.
Okay. All right. On music, what's a favorite song, musician, concert, or album?
Well, I used to love a lot of female vocalists like Joni Mitchell and Carly Simon, but um, now I don't tend to listen to music a lot, although I still love classical music and I used to play in a symphony. So I love Brahms is probably my favorite composer. But recently, my granddaughters were making playlists for me of the music they like.
Hmm.
So I was trying to think of who I liked that I could share with them. And Rebecca turned me on to the group Garbage.
Hmm.
She was maybe in college, and I started playing their songs again, and I loved every one of them. So I think Garbage would be my
All
favorite
right.
group.
All right. If you think back to your long history of loving music, is there an album that was your favorite?
Well, it's funny because in the old days when we bought albums, we played them over and over and over and over. So, my first album was Meet the Beatles. And I think next to that, it was either Joni Mitchell's first album or Carly Simon's No Secrets. I played those a lot. Yeah.
What was the last concert you attended?
Hmm. It was the Hopkins Band holiday concert that my friend Amy plays flute in, and it was very fun. It was last winter, and she's doing it again next Sunday. Oh, and my friend Angela plays violin, and I attended her concert. But in terms of musicians, it would have to be David's concert at the bitter end.
Okay. All right. Now, sports is interesting. I don't know that you're a big sports fan, but I'll talk a little bit more about it later. But do you have any sports that you do enjoy watching?
I don't watch any sports at all.
Okay.
I think the only time I was ever a sports fan was the year I lived in St. Louis and loved the Spirits of St. Louis. You were working as a statistician for them. And I had a huge crush on number 34, Mike Barr. But that was the year I was interested. I went to some hockey games in college because I had friends who were on the hockey
Yeah.
team. But I'm not a sports fan.
I remember you telling me about Wisconsin hockey games and how everybody stood up and pointed at the goalie and yelled "Siv" when they.
Siv. Yeah.
Well, now your husband is a sports fan. How do you reconcile with when he's involved in watching sports or playing sports? Or do you just do other things during those times?
Oh yeah. I mean, he plays tennis and pickleball, and those are his, and he hikes. Um, but our TV is in the basement. And so he watches his sports down there, which is great because I don't like hearing the games. And when there's a really big playoff like the World Series, he's a Dodgers fan. I'll go down and say, "Are they winning?" I know he loves to talk about it, and all his friends are sports fans. And if we go out with them, there's always a lot of sports talk.
Yeah,
But it's basically something he does
yeah.
without me.
Did um did Dad ever take you to a game?
When and we lived in Omaha, I think he took me to the Omaha Cardinals and taught me how
Okay,
to keep track, and I
okay,
I thought that was interesting. I went to one Twins game since
okay.
we're little. I think I went to one Timberwolves game and one hockey game maybe, but
Okay.
yeah, I'm not a
All right.
sports person.
All right. The fi final topic is humor. Do you have a
Hmm.
favorite comedian or film or show or book that's funny?
I don't tend to read funny books, although I have read a little David Sedaris, and I think he's funny.
Hmm.
Um, I used to like Monty Python when they first came out, and that sense of humor I really enjoyed. Michael's not someone who likes slapstick, and so we do not watch humorous things together. And he never liked Monty Python, so but I did, and yeah, I guess I get a kick out of Stephen Colbert. I like his sense of humor, but that's about it.
And who's the best at making you laugh?
Well, sometimes Michael. That certainly our early in our relationship, he made me laugh. And I remember one time when our kids were young, we were taking a class in finance, managing our finances, and it was really boring. The teachers were not very good, and we would write little notes to each other, and we'd just burst out laughing. So he definitely did. I think when I was young, our dad made me laugh a lot.
Yeah. And who are you able to crack up?
That's a good question. I have a friend, Eileen. I used to make her laugh a lot. Um, yeah, I don't know. I know that I made her laugh. Maybe Jossie
Yeah,
sometime.
I was thinking Jassy.
Yeah, Jossie and I made each other laugh.
All right, it's time for you to share a story with us. What story would you like to tell us?
Well, I thought I'd tell you the story of my first and only trip to Japan.
Okay.
Back in March of 2011, um, there was a colleague there who invited me to come over and do some workshops and attend a statistics education gathering. And I got him to invite my colleague Bob. I had a very close colleague and research partner, Bob Delmas. So he found the finances to bring both of us over. And Bob wanted to bring his wife Rose along, and Michael didn't want to go. So I asked if I could bring my friend Eileen with me. So the four of us set off, and we spent a week in Tokyo, and we had a great time. The conference was very enjoyable. They took great care of us. They wined and dined us. And then we also had some free time to explore the city. And coincidentally, during that week, our brother David was giving a concert, and we all managed to take the public transport to hear his concert. And that was quite an experience. So we had a great time, and we were at the airport, finally coming home, and just full of all of our good memories. And we're boarding the plane, and we were Eileen and I were sitting in one of those things that's two seats with an opening next to the window. And then there were three seats behind us, and we're talking to people around us. Everybody's comparing notes about their trip, and the plane starts shaking. And Eileen is quite talkative, and she's full stream talking to the guy behind us. And I said, "What's happening?" And she said, "Oh, it's the luggage handlers. They're just loading the luggage." And then I look out and I see the giant jets next to us shaking. And people started saying, "Is this an earthquake?" And a flight attendant walked down the aisle, and I said, "Is this an earthquake?" And she said, "Yes, we're having an earthquake." And I said, "Oh, do you get these all the time?" Because we had had a small minor one during the week that made our chandelier swing. And she said, "Not like this." So we were in the beginning of an earthquake. And then the pilot got on and said, "We're having an earthquake, or we've just had an earthquake, and we have to stay put. We don't know if there's been damage to the runway. We'll keep you posted." And everybody starts, buzzing like, "What's happening? What's happening?" And my phone didn't have cell phone. I didn't have cell phone coverage in Japan, but a few people did. And I heard people say nuclear reactor and tsunami. And I thought I was going to look out the window and the ground was going to open up and we were going to fall in, and there would be fires and I would die. And I thought, "Oh my God, I'm on the other side of the world. I'm never going to see Michael again." And it was scary, but then, we were still there, and we ended up being on the ground for 6.5 hours. The flight attendants walked around and gave us cold food, and they said no alcohol, which I think everybody was wishing they could have a drink, but we got things like cold salad and desserts. And then they had the big screens where you could watch a movie. So the pilot put on movie, or not the pilot, but the staff put movies on for people to watch. But what happened is a lot of people just wanted to wander around and talk. And so we had these little clusters, like neighborhoods, where people would talk, and you'd walk up and you'd say, "What do you hear? What do you know?" And rumors were going around. So one rumor is that they were going to take us off the plane, and we were going to be given blankets and pillows, and we were going to sleep in the airplane hangar. We'd also heard that the airport had closed, and that's why we couldn't take off too. So there was little rumors going around. People were walking up and down. The whole time this was happening, my colleague Bob, who was a third-degree black belt, put on headphones and watched a movie, tuned everything out. But his wife Rose joined us in the, "What do you know? What do you hear?" So we did that, and funny things happened. Like, I looked over at my friend Eileen, and she had bought all these little Japanese cookies to bring home to her grandchildren, and she just opened them up and started eating all of them. And then another thing that was kind of funny, the people sitting behind us, who we became a neighborhood together, one of them was a very tall, quiet man. And at some point, when I came back from one of my rotations, Eileen, who was very short, is looking up at this man with the utmost interest and saying, "So have you always lived in Iowa?" And when she said that, I just started laughing because it just struck me as so funny. And then he looked at me with this little smile, like, "I'm going to laugh, but I don't know what's so funny." And then she started laughing. Um, but ultimately, I just kind of said sorry and walked away. So we made friends with our neighbors. We shared whatever information we could. And then somehow we were all sitting down, or they told us to sit down again. And the pilot came on and said, "Well, we're going to get going soon." And I thought he meant we're going to get off the plane because we never thought we were going to take off. And so I thought he was going to say, okay, we're going to get off the plane. And then I heard him say, flight attendants, prepare for takeoff. And everybody just went, what? And it turns out 5 planes had been already loaded at the time of the earthquake. And I think because we were on Delta, which is the largest airline in the world, we were
Hmm.
cleared to fly to Minneapolis. So after 6.5 hours, we were cleared for takeoff. We took off. They turned off the lights. Everybody passed out. And we landed in Minneapolis. Everybody clapped. We were so relieved and got off the plane. And there was Michael waiting for me. So that was my big story.
Well, thanks for sharing that. It triggers another story that you were involved in, also involving precarious travel,
Mm.
which involved our dad's 60th birthday party. And we had planned a surprise party for him, in which the fact that most everyone had just been home for Christmas, we were going to use that as a major surprise. They were going to return a week later to celebrate his birthday on January 8th. So everyone had gone home, but they're all coming back. You were going to come in the night before the party and help with some of the last minute preparations. We had prepared an elaborate awards program, awards show. It's the winner of every award was Dad, but there was going to be nominees. It was going to be humorous. So we had all this work that we were going to do. And you set off from Minneapolis on Ozark Airlines, supposed to arrive early evening on a Friday night. And we set out to pick you up at the airport. And what, lo and behold, the fog started to set in, beginning a precarious weekend for you, in which your plane didn't land. It circled around, went back, no, went on to Memphis, right? And you spent the night in Memphis. So we thought, all right, well, we'll get you the next day. Meanwhile, I'm over at Barb's apartment and we're doing the work to prepare, but then start to get worried about the other flights. So David was flying in from LA on the red eye, and Ann was coming in the morning from Cleveland, and it didn't look like things were getting any better. Also, it was kind of hard to tell what the actual situation was back then. You didn't really have a way of looking online, or you had to call a number and try to get
Mm-hmm.
through. And in any
Mm.
case, I set out. I hadn't heard that David's flight had been canceled. I set out early in the morning to meet him at the St. Louis airport, and the visibility was zero. And I nonetheless slowly drove. I saw various cars that had run into the median. I got to the airport. I somehow managed to get there parked. There was no sign of life. The airport seemed to be closed, but I nonetheless went up to the monitor to see if, what the story with his flight from LA was. And as I'm looking at the monitor, lo and behold, David came up from behind me and he had arrived. He was
Mm.
like the first flight that had been allowed to land since the previous day. So then we were going to see about getting Ann's flight. And then you were coming in slightly later, a return attempt from Memphis. And another flight landed, and then Ann's flight landed, and they shut the airport down again. So out of the 3 flights that landed, 2 of them were David and Ann. But you didn't have that luck. Your flight came back, circled around again. I think you even went back to Minnesota at one point, if
We
I remember
did. We
right.
landed in Minnesota.
And then made another attempt and failed, and they sent you to Louisville. And by this time, I know you were frazzled, and I think you gave me a call where you were in tears, telling me, and I said, try to get on TWA. They think they have better instrument landing. And I didn't hear anything further from you after that. So I thought, all right, I think she's gotten on the TWA flight. But we had to go. The party began, and we're missing people who didn't come in from various other cities because of the weather. Somewhere along the line, Mom got nervous and began to spill the secret of the party to Dad. But in any case, we got him to was it the Cheshire Inn? Is that we were
Yeah.
having it? And hadn't heard anything further from you. The party began and weren't too far into it when you came running in and you had arrived at the St. Louis airport by bus from Eastern Airlines bus. Ran into Uncle Earl and Aunt Carla and Grandma, right? And got a ride
Mhm.
and got to the party. So to me, that was an incredible story. I don't know how you survived that.
That was amazing because I'm still amazed that I just went up to I heard the announcements for the Eastern Airline buses taking off for St. Louis. And I hadn't been flying Eastern Airlines, but I just ran up and said, you're going to St. Louis? And he said, yes. And I got on the bus. And then when I got off the plane, I got off the bus at the St. Louis airport, the airport had just opened. And so Grandma and Aunt Carla and Uncle Earl had just arrived, and there were huge lines waiting for taxis. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I heard this loud voice say, I need a taxi to the Cheshire Inn. And I remember, the Cheshire Inn, I'm going to the Cheshire Inn. And it was Uncle Earl. So that was pretty amazing. So I jumped in with them and made it for the last part
That's
of.
right. Well, given the time of year, I also want to relate a quick story that I remember from when we were in New Jersey. It's a lot rather different than today when beginning in October or even in September, you'll start to hear Christmas music everywhere you go. I remember being recently at the hotel we stayed at in Baltimore in November. I'd go down for breakfast and there was just be Christmas music. That's all we heard. But back then, you and I got the idea we wanted to hear Christmas music, but we couldn't hear any. And we called the local radio station in New Jersey and we requested some Christmas music and they played our request. I think you asked for Silver Bells
Oh,
and they played it. So I think we were pretty pleased with ourselves for having gotten it. Nowadays, you wouldn't have to call. You'd be telling them to stop playing the Christmas music.
yeah. Well, I thought you were going to say how we went out caroling
Oh,
when
yes. You remember
in
that story?
Louis. We would go door to door singing Christmas carols.
We had Nick Robbins playing his guitar and you, me, and
Hmm.
Barb and Nick
Hmm.
were singing door to door. No one sent us away. I guess we were okay.
Somebody tried to give us money,
That's right.
maybe to leave. Well, I thought you were going to say something else about my bad luck traveling because one time when I was going to visit Anne and I was getting in a taxi and I left my suitcase on the street because they were going to load it, or I was getting on a van, a taxi ran over my suitcase and broke it, and I had to carry
I
it.
don't know that story. I'll
And
tell you a story that you'll probably
yeah,
get a kick out of the time. Dad was a notorious get to the airport early guy. So kind of
hmm,
the opposite of David. David was more get to the airport
yeah,
just in time with a few
hmm,
detours along the way. But Dad was like, get there 2 hours early. And so one time he was flying to Cleveland to visit Ann, and he got to the airport so early that they found out that even though he was on TWA, there was an American flight leaving right when he arrived, and he could get in an hour early. So he thought, oh, great. So, he just got on the plane, and the flight ended up getting diverted and landed in Dayton. And meanwhile, David Olszewski is waiting for him at the Cleveland airport. And his flight arrives and he's not on it.
oh,
So eventually, I guess they must have figured out how to get him. But only Dad would have gotten on an early flight and end up in the wrong city. Well, one
well,
thing I wanted to mention was out of the five
yeah,
categories that we went through, the five categories, about
yeah,
the incredible influence I would say that you've had on me in those categories. Maybe in one instance I had influence on you, but if you start with books, we're always talking about books, but you often have given me good suggestions. You'll tell me that you got to get this book, and I'll just order it immediately, and I almost
hmm,
always enjoy it. So we have a real, I think, chemistry on reading. And on
hmm,
the second topic of food, we have a long history of enjoying food together. There was a time I came and visited you in Minneapolis when we made a point of going out and we went to a restaurant where we could live it up and had all these foods prepared tableside.
hmm, yes,
And that was a memorable one. And we've always enjoyed fine dining together, including this summer when we dined together at Blue in Glen
yes,
Arbor. So we have a long history, I think, of really enjoying food
hmm,
together. Um, in the category of music, I think about you as being very influential.
hmm,
And when I'm writing about musical artists that I ended up liking, often it was traced back to an album that you had first bought. So you
oh,
seem like you were always on sort of the leading edge of many of these things. Remember
hmm.
you telling me excitedly about a mystery group that was on the radio, which turned out to be the Bee Gees. That was in
Yes.
1967. I
Hmm.
remember you getting the Doors' first album, and you're getting
Mm,
Bob Dylan's John Wesley Harding, and
mm,
and there were many folk albums that you had, and so you just seemed to be someone
mm,
who was getting these albums, and then you'd like them, and then I'd sort of pick up on it. You'd have Sam and Dave, the best of Sam and Dave, or you'd have greatest hits of other groups. There's Love and Spoonful, I remember, was another one. So to me, that was a huge
Mm.
influence,
Wow.
and so I often cite that when I'm talking about how did I get
Mm.
interested in that music. It goes back to a record that you had bought.
Mm.
And then the sports was maybe the one direction where I had influence because you miraculously got interested in the Spirits of St. Louis and came to some games and rooted for Mike
Yes.
Barr. So
Mhm.
that was a good moment. Of course, my most recent guest, Tom Marcus, and I had that tremendous bond over the
Mm.
Spirits of St. Louis. So there was two people that we had a bond over that brief existence of that
Mhm.
team. And then in the area of humor, I think we've had a long history of enjoying some of the same things. You introduced me to Monty Python that you mentioned before I
Mhm.
ever even saw Monty Python and hadn't come to St. Louis yet. You were seeing it in Chicago, and you would quote various funny lines from it and crack me up, and then I would repeat those lines like as if I had seen the show, which I
You
had
did a
not.
better job than me.
And then when Monty Python finally came to St. Louis, that was great. We were so excited about it.
Oh,
Love Monty Python. But I think we also went to a Marx Brothers movie together, if I
yeah.
remember, in St. Louis, and saw maybe Horse Feathers over at Washington U. And I remember
Oh, yeah,
loving the Marx Brothers. And I was,
we did. We watched that together when we lived in New Jersey. We watched Marx Brothers on TV.
yeah, I think it was Room Service, if I remember right,
Hmm.
was maybe the first one I ever saw of theirs. And
Hmm.
then when I came to Minneapolis, you took me to Dudley Riggs,
Oh,
which was the
yes.
local comedy club. I think we probably
Hmm.
went to Second City together
We
at some point
did.
in Chicago. You talked me about Kentucky Fried Movie,
Oh,
which
yeah.
was a group from Madison, right?
Madison. Hmm.
And so there's a long history there too of humor. So to me, these five topics, with maybe the exception of sports, align pretty strongly, I'd say, between the two of us.
Wow. That's really touching. I appreciate that. Well, and I think I also have to amend my comment about who makes me laugh because I've laughed so much in this interview. You obviously know how to make me laugh. So I appreciate that. We've had some good laughs together, especially when you recount stories, and especially family stories.
That's right. Well, that's the best way to deal with it is through laughter, and that's how I
Hmm.
tend to remember it. But at any rate, is there anything else you wanted to add before we conclude today's session?
Well, I guess I just feel very fortunate to have you in my life and to have a good relationship with you. I love the time that we spent together in Michigan. Every summer, you've introduced us to the homestead, and that's become such an important part of my life and now my daughters and granddaughters' lives. So I look forward to that every year. And I'm glad that we have opportunities to stay connected and see each other at family events. So yeah, I feel very fortunate. Thanks
Well,
for
thanks.
being an important person in my life.
And I just want to say that both in terms of your career, your family, and all the things that you've overcome, and particularly your vision challenges, I'm very proud of you.
Thank you. Thanks.
So, so thanks for joining me, Joan. Enjoyed the conversation
Me
and take
too.
care.
Thank you. Bye bye.